if you can talk about a moment in all this month, these many months of reporting where you were the most nervous or anxious, where you didn't feel that you and your colleagues had control of the story, weren't sure where it was going, or just where there was a moment where it felt perilous or nerve-wracking.
I think the nature of journalism and of investigations is it always feels a little perilous. I don't know about others in this room, but for me, I never sleep well the night before any investigation. It doesn't matter that I've fact-checked every word, everything that's in there. I'm still thinking about, is there something I missed? I'm second-guessing myself. Waking up in the middle of the night to look at that one last document just to make 100% sure that I worded it correctly. And I think for us, you know, being part of a team and having amazing bosses sort of eased that. Like I said, we knew from the very beginning what we had. And so there was never a question of, are they reporting all allegations to authorities? We knew from their own words, their own depositions, that was not happening. But I think for me personally, it was always the night before publication that I was worried, you know, because we want to get it right. And we don't want to not only get it wrong, but potentially harm someone. And so just the stress and the pressure of being right, I think, for me, was always kind of the most perilous moment. And, you know, I think it pushes you also, though, to be better. What else? Yeah, all the way back there.
Thank you so much for sharing the process and your story with us. I'm wondering, the burden to the victim blaming that exists for people who have experienced sexual assault, aside from the victim blaming, but also the stigma that is associated with it, the denial of sexual assault, does that raise the bar for ensuring, does that raise the stakes for ensuring that the story that you're reporting when it comes to sexual assault is accurate? Is that something that is present for stories related to sexual assault as opposed to other stories?
Not for me, no. I think that with any article, whether it's about a sensitive topic like sexual assault or a business person embezzling money, I mean, the passion for accuracy and fairness is still there. It doesn't matter what the topic is. I think the difference in writing about sexual abuse, sexual assault allegations is that a lot of times it's harder to prove, right? I mean, so as journalists, you're trying to figure out, how do I prove something that only two people were in the room there for? And so you try and verify as many facts as you can. You try and check every detail. You examine the backgrounds not only of the people who are accused, but those who are sharing the allegation or sharing their story. And so I don't think there's a difference in that commitment to accuracy. I think sometimes people shy away from stories like this just because they're harder. Not that they're less important. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi. So I was a gymnast for about 10 years, and the thing that was, I think, hardest for a lot of people in my life to understand was my relationship with my coach, because of the amount of time we spent kind of like unfettered. And I'm curious if you saw in some of your reporting what that dynamic looked like from some of the people who were survivors and how they related to their coach even though they were hurt, but there's still a relationship there that is incredibly intimate. So I'm just curious about your vantage point on that.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. You know, we all know sexual abuse is not a gymnastics problem. It's a pervasive community problem. But there are aspects of gymnastics that make this a place where people who want to do bad things to children go. And one of the things that was really important for us when we were doing our investigation was being very explicit with language, because like you talked about, you know, there's spotting in gymnastics. There's a lot of touching, more so than a lot of other sports that are out there. And the relationships that people have with their coaches, they travel with them, they, you know, especially when you get to an elite level, you're working 40 hours a week sometimes in the gym. And so you might be alone with your coach. They might be transporting you to and from practices. There's a lot of time where that happens. And that's just common. Even if it's against best practices, that's what happens. And so for us, examining the culture of gymnastics, that culture not only of, these relationships that they forge with adults that they trust, but also how those relationships can be exploited was really important. And when we talk to the previous question about reporting on sexual abuse allegations, that's why, generally when you see a story about sexual abuse, you see words like molested, or you see general language that's not explicit to what the person actually did. And that was something very different about this investigation versus other investigations that I've done on this topic, because it was really important for people to understand it wasn't a slip of the hand during a spotting maneuver, that this was a sexual abuse. And so that also, was a different conversation with survivors too. Yeah.
How would you characterize the support that you got from the highest levels of your newspaper during the course of this project?
I'm so glad that you asked that. I am so beyond grateful to my bosses. So first of all, for context, right? I mean, it's not common that they let you fly to another state, not even knowing really if you have a story or if you're going to get anything of value. So from day one, Jeff Taylor in particular, who's now with USA Today, was incredible with allowing us to do the work that we needed to do. And I didn't know it at the time, but I found out as we were flying all over the country, interviewing survivors and gathering records and things like that, there were notes quietly going out to the managers saying, hey, let's tighten up on travel expenses this month. Like, he was making sure that we could do the work that he believed was important. The other thing that's really important about the support that we got, not only from Jeff and Steve Berta and Albie Lindsay, is from both the Indianapolis Star and Gannett, because they paid, as I mentioned, for that motion to intervene in the Georgia lawsuit, which was, as I'm sure you can imagine, not inexpensive. It took 9 months to get access to those documents, 2 trips to the Georgia Supreme Court, fighting for access to them before they were finally released. And they also committed to having 4 people full-time on this project for 2 years, and then other people coming in and out as they needed to. So, I mean, this would not have happened if not for the support and dedication of my bosses. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, really, they were amazingly supportive. Even, obviously most newspapers, there's a separation between the news side and the advertising side. But even on the advertising side, they were figuring out ways to help us do the work that we needed to do. So we were incredibly fortunate. And so much of the credit for the work that happened is a credit to them and the time and resources that they gave us. Yeah.
I'm really curious on how the power dynamics worked when you talked to some of the men, the assaulters, and if the fact that you are a woman, if that played any role in those power dynamics.
That's an interesting question. So actually, most of them would not talk to us. So I had a couple people who had been convicted who were willing to talk, but only if they could be unnamed sources. And I refused to allow somebody who was on the sex offender registry and who'd been convicted of the crime to share their story as an unnamed source. I couldn't understand how I would justify that to the public. So we just said that we would rather not use it than to allow them to shield themselves in that way. Actually, one of the only people that talked, interestingly enough, was Larry Nassar. He met with my colleague Tim Evans, and to date, I believe Tim is still the only person who's ever interviewed Nassar as it relates to sexual abuse allegations. And Tim was actually, we were just talking about this at our table, Tim was actually with Larry Nassar when that story published, because he was doing the interview and then we had gotten everything that we needed to be able to go. And so Tim stopped the interview and said, we're about to publish this story about these allegations that we've just been talking about. Is there a comment you want to make? And they went in, came back, and one of the hugely significant things that I don't think people think as much about now is that the statement that Nassar's attorney made at the time is what brought so many other survivors forward, because his attorney said that Larry Nassar had never used any form of penetration during a medical treatment. And as soon as that was said, as soon as survivors read that, they knew immediately that that was untrue, because even if it had been a legitimate medical treatment, it, as they thought it had been in some cases all along, they knew they'd been penetrated. And so that really changed the entire dynamic there. Did that answer your question? Other questions? Yeah.
Do you remember, first, thank you for inspiring and important work.
Thank you.
You remember any specific moment after a long day of reporting or talking to sources or interviewing that you just knew you had it and you called your editors or colleagues and told them what happened? Any specific aha moment?
Obviously the first one I think was reading those depositions and seeing what the officials said. The other really significant moment, I think, for all of us was when the third survivor had come forward with allegations against Nassar, because you have to understand, at the time, we were inundated with people asking us to look into many other gymnastics officials. But by the time that we had 3 about this one individual, and these allegations had no connection to one another, we knew that it was more significant. Because for those of us who've written about sexual assault, I mean, 3 people coming forward unprompted, like we hadn't written anything about him yet, hadn't even mentioned his name, was pretty unusual. So I think that was a significant moment. And then I think also his arrest was a significant moment too, where we, because I think as journalists, right, part of what makes you good at your job is you're always questioning, could I be wrong? Is there something I'm missing? Always digging for that last interview, that last document to make sure that you get it right. And when they found all the child pornography, it became a lot harder for a lot of people to say, this can't be right. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you're in a community newspaper. I mean, basically you're in Indianapolis. The chain backed you up and helped amplify your story in a significant way. I'm wondering what the community reaction was to you guys being focused on this story. Did you have people say, I gotta read it, did it encourage people to continue to read the paper? Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of reaction that had?
Well, from an analytics perspective, it did incredibly well, and from a local reader perspective, it did. Probably a better question for our audience analysts, but I will tell you that they told us that there was a pretty significant subscription bump after our investigation came out because people wanted to support the work that we were doing, and they specifically cited the work that we'd done. I do wonder now if there, as is pretty common, I think a little bit of fatigue because it's a hard topic to report on. And so it's really difficult, I think, also for the public to read day in, day out. And so I think there is, to a certain degree, I think everyone realizes how important it is, but it's just so hard to read day in, day out. So I think that's kind of the more recent reaction. And you had a question too.
Yeah. So one thing that I find really striking in how you described how the story kind of came together, or how you came to learn the series of facts, was how many details came after the public read a first piece of reporting, and it seemed to build on that. So I'm curious if that was already something if that way of getting new information is already something you thought of as part of your reporting process, or also if that's changed how you approach your reporting now, having seen how that worked with this story.
I think every investigation is different, and what an investigation needs is different. I think for this one, people always ask me, is there anything that you would do differently? The only thing I would do differently is I kind of wish I could write that first story again. Not because it was bad, but because all of the things that I didn't know when that first story came out that we now know today, I picture like what that story could be like. Yes, that would be great. See, I told you guys, it keeps me alive. I was not kidding. Thanks, babe. And now I got distracted, I'm sorry. Remind me of the rest of your question, did I answer it?
I guess.
Oh, would I do it differently?
No, if that's something you try to build into your story
Right.
now of like getting the word out in hopes of hearing more back.
I think it depends on the story. I think that for that specific story, that was the way it needed to happen. I mean, we had reported the systemic handling. Sorry. I'm not used to talking, I'm usually listening, so. And one thing led to another thing. I mean, Larry Nassar wasn't even on our radar. And so it would not have happened. We wouldn't have gotten at that if we hadn't done the first story. And if Rachel hadn't seen it, Jamie hadn't seen it, and others. I'll get to you, Sam, I promise.
Thank you so much, and I would like to thank Peter and Nate who actually introduced you
Yes.
to us, and I'm very happy that I actually finally voted for you. I
Thank you.
I have a question about criticism. You mentioned that you had a lot of criticism in the middle of that investigation, and we all live in online world, and I think we all experience a lot of harassment online. And how did you experience that, and how did you dealt with that, and where did you get the strength to actually battle and go forward?
That's a great question. I think first, the best defense against criticism is being right. So, we were so meticulous in the reporting process and fact-checking process that we focused on what was important, which was the reporting and the story and the information. Sorry, apparently the water's not helping. But I think, the other thing that's important to know is that, a lot of social media attacks become very personal, and that was not the case, at least not for me in this particular investigation. It was more that we were wrong, not that we were terrible people or lying or fake news or any of that kind of stuff. Sorry. Did you? I'm sorry.
Take a big step.
I'll just be guzzling back.
Just guzzle your water. If you were unprepared for Larry Nassar, you certainly must have been unprepared for the hundreds of women that came forward. And I'm curious, it's hard enough to protect one person that you're reporting on that is going through this, but as the women were coming forward, I'm just wondering if you could give us any insight into what that was like to be hearing their stories and also be trying to protect them from what was happening to them, because that's, it must have just been overwhelming as the stories poured into you.
Yeah, so much of what we were doing in that time was listening, and I in particular, I think my colleagues as well, tend to over communicate with survivors because we don't want them to be surprised. We want them to be prepared for what might happen. And so we explain, what the process is going to look like, the kind of information that's going to be out there when we're sharing these incredibly personal details, what people might be saying, how they can navigate through all of that during the process. But, as a person, right, you're a human being. So it is incredibly emotional, and all of us had different ways of navigating through that. It's difficult to hear day in, day out, every single day, all day long, stories of what people have suffered. And, we all had sort of our own way of dealing with that. Yeah.
Did you find that other journalists, competitors, immediately accepted your story, or did you have people trying to knock it down?
So I think one thing that we did that was really smart for the first piece and moving forward was we used Document Cloud to actually attach. Did I hear a yay? Yeah.
I'm literally texting with the founder of Document Cloud right now.
Oh, wonderful. Tell them thanks.
Okay.
And so we actually attached to that first story excerpts of the depositions and of other records so that people didn't have to take our word for it, our wording for it, that they could click and look at the documents themselves. And so actually an interesting thing that we saw immediately when that first story came out was people were not only sharing our story, but were actually sharing PDFs of those records as well. And so there was never really an effort by other media to try and knock that down because it was so heavily documented. I mean, there were a lot of links in that first story. And that was deliberate. We wanted people to understand how we were coming to these conclusions because we were making very significant conclusions about what USA Gymnastics executives were doing. And we wanted to make sure that we could back that up.
Could you describe a few of the conversations with the survivors that really stuck with you, or that will forever, I guess, and what maybe if there are any common characteristics, like what really struck you overall about the conversations you have with so many of these women?
Every conversation is different. The ones that looking back kind of still resonate with me. So in that first article that we did, there was like one tiny sentence that said, as it related to a coach named William McCabe, and another girl was abused in 1999. That came from federal court records. We didn't name the girl, we didn't even know who she was. But we were pointing out, again, that systemic situation. And after that story ran, I got a call from a woman, and she said, that girl that you referenced from 1999, that was me. And I've never told anybody what happened before, but I wanted to say thank you for what you did. And so, we talked for a while, numerous days, on an ongoing basis, and then she called me and she said, I want to share my story. So we ended up actually doing a separate story on her and what she'd been through. And that was, I think, significant for me because it meant something. That story maybe to the broader audience didn't mean a lot because it was one more survivor story, but to me it meant a lot because she was trusting us to say what happened for the first time. So that story sticks with me. The other one was a woman named Jenny who was a survivor of abuse by a coach named Ray Adams. And when she told her mom had discouraged her from reporting to police. And her mom was actually there during the interview with us years later. That coach had gone on to abuse other people, was ultimately convicted years later. But she talked about, both being a survivor, but also having to survive guilt that she hadn't reported it earlier. And again, it was not her fault, right? But hearing her be open about what that path was like for her and what she's been through and how she's tried to move forward was really significant. So, those seem like maybe not the most well-known of stories, but those are the stories that meant something to me because it meant something to them. Yeah.
You obviously have done a lot of great stories, and I'm sure that there are many journalists who look up to your stories and work. So I'm curious, you mentioned about how those stories are really hard to report. So it's easy for other journalists to be discouraged or afraid of tackling these stories. So I'm wondering, how do you mentor other reporters and encourage them to pursue these stories?
I think the most important thing, and we were talking about this a little bit at the table, because it doesn't just relate to writing about sexual abuse or sexual assault, but having some sort of outlet, knowing when you need a break and taking that break is so, so important. I had to learn it when I was covering criminal courts early in my career. I had to figure out a way to deal with seeing the worst every single day. But but when I'm talking to younger journalists, that's what I try and encourage them to do is figure out that thing that you like that takes you out of the moment, whether it's exercise or preferably a healthy habit. Reading, trashy TV, gardening, like whatever works for you, figure out what that thing is and know when it becomes a lot to go to that thing and do it and just be willing to say, I'll take a break. And not to put you on the spot, Pete, but I'm gonna put you on the spot. You know, I think as journalists, like you have to be this, or you have this image that you have to be this tough, bad, like nothing affects me person, which is not true. Journalists feel very, very deeply, but it's a calling and it's a work that we do. And I bring up Pete not just to throw him out there, but because he did an amazing piece in Medium, this is a couple years ago now, talking about his trauma in writing about these incredibly important stories that he does. And, you know, I try and encourage other people to have those conversations. Don't pretend that it's easy. Don't pretend that you don't care when you're hearing people describe these things or you're seeing crime scenes or you're sitting in criminal court and dealing with it, because it's okay to feel. It doesn't mean you change the reporting process. It doesn't mean you don't fact check, but it's okay to feel. Yeah.
What usually happens with investigative reporters after such a big story is that you became kind of hostage of your stories. That
Yes.
How do you feel with that? How do you feel?
Was it something in my voice? It's I see my friend back there. Mike is back there. Hi, Mike. Which is a perfect segue to say, because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know, it's sort of a love-hate relationship when you get to a certain point in an investigation, because you care about it so much, you're so passionate about it, and you want to affect change and you want to share all of the stories, but then you're also tired. And there are so many stories out there that need to be told. And so you have this sort of both in your newsroom, should I move on? Should I not move on? But also internally, because part of you wants to move on, the other part of you doesn't want to let it go because it's your baby and you care about it and you're passionate about it. And so I think that's just I haven't figured out how to navigate that really. I try and do everything, but that's probably not a good long-term strategy. But I think that's one of the great challenges when you do an investigation that resonates, like Mike's did with the Catholic Church and like USA Gymnastics and like so many other investigations out there is, you know, how do you figure out how to do that? And kind of what Tim and I in particular have done is we try and just write the bigger stories relating to USA Gymnastics that are left, and we let people who cover Olympic sports, we have colleagues who do that, cover the smaller interim stories. And that way we're also kind of working on other things at the same time. I don't know if that's the right answer though, but that's how we do it.
Can I ask?
She has one more.
Prerogative.
So I didn't see Mike and Sasha come in, welcome. Just for those of you who don't know, so.
Oh,
Mike and
Sasha
who
too,
worked-
hi.
Who worked on the Spotlight team and the stories about the Catholic Church and priest abuse, and maybe this is a question for all of you. So there's this shocking number of how many survivors and victims, but the other number that's shocking is the sort of growing circle of people who over time know or suspect or should know or should suspect. And as the number of victims increases, so does that number. And I'm wondering what, in doing these stories, what did you learn about denial? Because it's not just denial. I mean, there's some people who maybe are financially incentivized, right? Incentivized, the president of a university or the head of, the Gymnastics USA. But there are parents, there are others who are witness or semi-witness to these things. And like, what do we know about denial from these stories?
Go ahead, guys.
we learned a lot about denial. I mean, I think it happens for a lot of reasons. It's an icky subject. People don't want to think about it. People don't want to talk about it. People don't want to face it. People don't want to believe it's possible. So I think there's that factor. And then, there's the other piece of it is we're talking about people in positions of authority, people we respect. Gymnastics coaches, instructors, professors, priests. I mean, who wants to believe that a priest or a renowned gymnastics instructor is sexually abusing a minor, a child? I mean, what could be more disgusting? What could be more abhorrent? So I think there's just an intrinsic instinct almost to turn away and not believe that this is happening. And then, of course, the other piece of it is that people in institutions, whether it's a university or an institution like the Catholic Church or a large corporation, I mean, I think people in institutions they come to believe that their primary responsibility is to protect the institution rather than the people that the institution is supposed to serve. So I think that's another reason for the denial. And all of these things come into play to keep sexual abuse by people in authority a secret.
But I also think sometimes they think they're up against an institution or a person that's too big to take on. Who's gonna take the risk of being the first person to speak out and hope you don't end up destroyed? And so I think we end up having to overcome that a lot.
I can't say it better than they did. No, I agree. And that was, I mean, to both of your points, that was absolutely true of Larry Nassar. And that was why Rachel Denhollander didn't come forward before, is she thought that no one was going to believe her over this renowned sports doctor in Olympic medicine. And, I also wouldn't discount how good some predators are at hiding what they do. Larry Nassar was great at deflecting criticism when it came his way. He had a list of supporters that he could call to talk to people and talk about how great of a guy he was. He positioned himself as an expert, would, give presentations, and he was part of a book, and he did all of those sorts of things as well. And so they, not only do people not want to believe it, but these individuals a lot of times are really good at not, at deflecting criticism. So.
I just want to thank Marisa and all of you, especially our guests, for coming tonight, and thank you so much. Well